So our second session is going to revolve around this, and to interact with you all on this session, we have with us Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe. We can welcome Mr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe. Vinay's last book, which was titled Beyond a Billion Ballads, was published in June 2013 and was released, by the hands of the then Chief Minister of Gujarat. You know who it was in 2013? The present Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The book was also launched at Delhi at the hands of the former Chief Election Commissioner, Dr. S.Y. Qureshi. Vinay ji, as many of you might have seen him on TV, is a very regular person on television debates and also a very regular writer for many English, Hindi and Marathi newspapers and weeklies. In 1998, Dr. Sahasrabudhe received the award for Best Literary Work from Government of Maharashtra for his co-edited work Niwdak Manus, which is a book in Marathi. Presently, he is the director of Rambhav Margi Prabodhini and he is the National Vice President of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Next up, we have Adwaita Kala. Adwaita Kala entered the literary world with her novel titled Almost Single, which she believed actually came out of an observation that the concept of love and dating had changed considerably. But after that novel, it was no looking back for Adwaita. She has written several books. She has also written several scripts for movies, and the most notable being the National Award-winning film Kahani. When she wrote Kahani, and hotelier by profession, she quit her job as a hotel executive to write. And her writing has been from fiction to non-fiction. Adwaita has lived in 6 cities before choosing to stay in Delhi for over 2 years. However, she travels a lot, but she avoids air travel, I'm told. So, I'm glad that we have Adwaita Kala with us today. We have Mr. Sandeep Singh. Sandeep Singh is an author of 9 books ranging from Indian way of management, advertising to women and child development. He is a postgraduate in rural development. He has a postgraduate degree in media planning and he has also a general business management degree from IIM Bangalore. He is on the board of 4 companies apart from having been a part of a lot of committees with regards to media planning, advertising and business. In the past, he has worked with channels like Sub TV, Zee and other media houses. Sandeep ji has also been a part of an expert committee appointed by Prasar Bharati. Sandeep ji, we are very glad to have you here. Our speaker moderator for the session will be none other than Dr. Satish Mode. Dr. Satish Mode is the director of VES Institute of Management at Western. Before joining Western, he was a professor in strategy and associate dean at NMIMS University. He completed his doctoral research from the University of Mumbai in Business Strategy. He is one of the founder-director of World Hindu Economic Forum and also the founder and past president of Center for International Studies, Mumbai. Dr. Mode has authored several pioneering books and his latest book includes Discover the Arjuna in You. So we are glad that we have our director to moderate this session. Without much ado, I'll hand over the panel to our moderator, Dr. Satish Mode.
Good morning to all of you. When we talk about India's soft power, I would like to mention that there's a difference between soft power and hard power. When we are talking about a country may have hard power in the form of military. That how much forces you have, armed forces you have, the kind of army, navy, air force, and also your other armed forces. It all constitutes the hard power of the country, that how they can enforce their power over other nations or within the country. So then what is soft power? Soft power deals with your social structure. It deals with your culture, it deals with your traditions, the strength of your currency, maybe the movies which you make, If you look at soft power of America, Hollywood is one of their biggest soft power. We all watch Hollywood movies all over the world and get influenced by America. They have US consulate, US library. They are also participating here. Is one of the biggest soft power. Their universities, educational institutions, where nearly 90,000 students go every year to study, and they come back by saying that I am studying in MIT, Harvard, Yale, UCLA, and they get influenced by that culture and that country, and they become a friend of that country. So that is also a soft power of any country. So when we are talking about soft power, it is all about other than hard military functions which are used by a country to have its influence on the world. And until unless it is a conflict situation where you are in direct conflict, most of the time a country which uses its soft power in the most effective manner actually surpasses everybody else. Another example is China, which has its Confucius Institute. And they have opened this Confucius Institute almost in every country. The government finances them and they go there. Their professors are there, researchers are there, they study the country and they also propagate their own culture. In India, we have not been very conscious about our soft power so far. There have been very few discussions and debates in media about India's soft power. So when we were planning about this session, we thought that there are people in our country who have been contributing in a great manner to India's soft power in the form of our Bollywood movies, in the form of our cultures, traditions, yoga, our way of life, our thinking, our Vedas, Upanishad. This is the way our soft power is perceived by our countries. So with this background, that what do we mean by soft power and what is actually India's soft power and how we can make it more effective, we have our panelists. And to begin with, I would first request Adwaita, because her movie Kahani is one of the best example of India's soft power, which was appreciated by everyone and which depicts its own story. So I would like to ask Adwaita to talk about her views on India's soft power and how we can harness it.
I can hear myself, I'm so loud. So how, it's difficult to define soft power. When we were sitting back over there, we were trying to decide, what is soft power. When I was preparing for this session, I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, what is soft power? And he said, maybe even Prime Minister Modi stopping over in Lahore and chatting with and wishing Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is also soft power. And I said, but is it? Because being a film writer, being a novelist, my thought process was so structured that soft power is really only about films and books and cultural influences and maybe gastronomy, but not necessarily this kind of high-level diplomacy between prime ministers of two sometimes hostile nations. But really that comes under soft power as well. So what actually I got from that conversation was that it's a huge field, it's a vast field, but we've really not thought about it, we've really not discussed it. So in that sense, I'm really grateful that we're having this session because it's time we actually thought about this and we actually thought of ways of leveraging it. I think we've had a great start with the Prime Minister looking at yoga and pushing it forward and really, in a sense, taking global ownership of it as it being an Indian thing, because yoga has traveled extensively. It's probably one of our best exports. But for the first time now, people around the world are identifying with its Indian roots, its roots in our tradition, in our history, in our yogis, and that I think has been a great triumph of Indian soft power in the recent past, It was always there, but the fact that it's now attributed to us in some way is great for are in the sense that you look at the Americans, even if it's their McDonald's and their French fries, they own it. When they see the Golden Arch, even if they're in Uzbekistan, they look at the Golden Arch, which is a big McDonald M, and they say, oh, this is home. It's not very healthy, it's fast food, it's completely commercial. And yet, it's a feeling of familiarity, and it's people of that local country will look at those Golden Arches and think America, in some context, in some way. Personally, for me, I've lived in neighboring countries. I've lived in Nepal, I've lived in what is called Myanmar now, what was Burma at one time, and I've seen the influence India has in these countries are not necessarily in terms of we being the bigger neighbor, but just in terms of our movies, our music, our culture, our movie stars. And I've always wondered, why have we not leveraged that? If you notice, every time Nepal has a problem with us, they stop our movies from being exhibited there. They say no Indian films. I think right now we're going through one of those phases with Nepal. It happens regularly because, the power of Hindi cinema in particular in a country like Nepal is immense. Salman Khan has probably as much of an obsessive following in Nepal as he does in India. But we've never used this to have some sort of concentrated effort. You're speaking about the American Library, speak about the British Council Library, for example. The British Council Libraries have been forums of engagement with young people in countries like Myanmar, for example, where before democracy came to the country, the British Council was actually hosting conversations on democracy with young people, teaching them how to really disseminate information on democracy much before the junta was defeated. And I think so. It's a very, very integral, it's a very important role that soft power can play, and in even achieving different goals. I remember when recently, you must have noticed, there's been all this controversy about Pakistani ghazal singers performing in India. Have you all heard about that? Yeah. And there's, and I remember going on some TV debates, and there were a lot of people who were saying that no, it shouldn't happen. But the bottom line is, you have to have multiple levels of engagement with countries. Even countries who are not very nice to us or who are hostile, you still need multiple levels of engagement. I think soft power steps in there. I think it opens up a door in a way that the military engagement will not, or tough talk will not, or kind of hostile words with each other will not. I think it does in a very, very indirect way. If you look even at gastronomy, for example, we did a festival, a Food for Thought festival, where we discussed gastronomy from the South Asia region, essentially the South region. You do know SAARC is happening this year, right? You all know that. So, it was something that was inspired by our regional cooperation, our regional understanding with each other, and really the things that tie us together, as opposed to the things that make us different. We can find enough reasons for differences. We can look at Myanmar and say, oh, but this is not what we have in common with them, or with Pakistan, or with Nepal, or with all of these countries. But if you actually look at this carefully, you will realize that we have so much in common. Be it food, be it in a sense the way we look even, our interest areas, our palette, our access to literature, to movies. There's so much we have in common. And I'm not even getting into historical roots. I'm not even getting into the fact that some 70 odd years ago, a lot of this was one country. So actually being different countries is more of a recent phenomena than our separate national identities, rather, is more of a recent phenomena than our joint cultural identity. And this is what people don't get. So suddenly if you are Akhand Bharat, you say, oh my God, what is that? How is that possible? But 70 years ago, that's what it was. So this is really, really more recent. This fact that we have our different national identities. But there is a cultural thread which is really important, which ties us all together across this region. And that is really the cultural thread we need to explore, because people need to learn to live with each other. People-to-people contact is essential. Exchange is essential. And this is where soft power really kicks in. This is where it comes in and it says that, we can have a meal together, we can listen to music, we can probably watch a film, and we can get along just fine. And that builds experience. That builds a different kind of experience. And I really think it's something we need to pursue very, very actively. I don't think it's limited to the things that even in my mind when I began speaking, that it was limited to film or books. It's not even limited to that. Of course films travel all over the country. Films travel more than books. If I mention Kahani to someone, 10 people, probably 8 have heard of it. If I mention my book, maybe not so many have heard of it. So there are different mediums which appeal to different audience. And I think that is something we need to understand. There are different things that appeal, like student exchanges, huge one. I myself studied in America. So, that's a big, big part of going somewhere and imbibing their culture to a huge extent. Whether you want to or not, because you go at a very young age. You go at 17 and a half, 18 was when I went. And there are things that you learn about a certain culture. You learn how to engage, to grow up as an adult. It's very subtle, but it does influence you, it does change you. That's why people have encouraged exchange. Even during the Cold War, for example, you're too young, but the USSR and America, there was something called the Goodwill Tour that the poet Robert Frost went on to the USSR, even during the Cold War, which was a very, very free, sort of frigid relations between the two nations. But still, there was an attempt to use soft power. It's one of the great examples of soft power historically. How the power of poetry, of letters, because he was so loved in the USSR, or the former USSR, that he actually traveled there to create some sort of goodwill between the new nations. So it's really something you cannot underestimate. Defense budgets keep growing, we keep buying more weapons, more defense, ammunition, but really the only option in the end is always peace. And that we have to find different ways of getting there. And I think soft power is a huge way of doing that. So, thank you.
While she was speaking, she talked about Muhammad Ali and Mehdi Hasan. And I was reminded of my young days. Chupke chupke raat din aasu bahana yaad hai. Those of my generation will remember those ghazals, and whenever Muhammad Ali or Mehdi Hasan will come, we will go and attend that. That is the power of, that is what we call soft power. Then another best example of soft power is the language which we are speaking right now. We are talking in English. We are Indians, we are Bharatiya, we are Hindustani. We have so many languages, thousands of bolis, but we are connecting with each other using English. That is the soft power. So Britishers have gone, but they have left their language with us, and we are totally influenced by that. So these are few examples of soft power. Now next I will request Vinay ji to enlighten us on his ideas about soft power based on his experiences.
Well, thank you Satish ji and all the fellow panelists and young minds who want to learn about and know about. I'm really very delighted. Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. Before I dwell a little at length on the meaning of soft power and its relevance today, I just would like to share a couple of experiences with you. Maybe you guys have heard the name of Salzburg. Salzburg. It's a small town in Austria. Very beautiful. You should be visiting sometime. But there is a foundation, which is an American foundation, which operates from Salzburg, and it's known as Salzburg Seminar. And they keep conducting, do visit the website of Salzburg Seminar, very interesting. And they keep organizing international seminars on certain contemporary issues and inviting people also on their own. Some people apply and then they get invited, some people they invite on their own, and that kind of a thing. I had the chance of visiting Salzburg and be a participant of a seminar in 2001. And typically they have a couple of resource persons from different countries. That time, of course, the issue was democracy, which is my own subject of research and study. And one of the resource persons was Lord David Gore Booth. He's no more. He was a former member, he was that time a member of the House of Lords in UK. And earlier he had served as UK's High Commissioner to India. That was in 80s. And he had his wife also participating in the seminar. So both were there. And I myself and there was another professor from Ruprel College, a political science teacher. Both of us were the participants from India. And David Gore Booth, and more particularly his wife, was so very fond of India. She had almost fallen in love with India. So the moment we met her, she kept on asking her, and we were there for 4 or 5 days, and she kept on asking her, oh, do you still get that Golgappas near India Gate? And how about that bhel in Chowpatty? And all those kinds of things. She was mesmerized by the idea of India, and she was, it was for her like going down the memory lane, and she was asking huge number of questions all along. And we kept on conversing, having a dialogue with her. At the end of the seminar, there was a lecture by one Mrs. Freiburga. She was at that time president of a small tiny country called Latvia. I don't know how many millions stay in Latvia. And she came, and that closing ceremony was kind of a grand function. So she came and she addressed from the podium, and she was speaking about democracy, people's participation, this and that. And we were sipping coffee at the end of the auditorium and also discussing. So this Mrs. Gore Booth asked me, Vinay, come over here. This lady is telling us about democracy, is that so? I said, yes. After the lecture, go and tell her that, ma'am, visit Mumbai sometime. In our one local train, your entire Latvia we can accommodate. This is soft power. She was enchanted by the very idea of India, and she was considering, she had a very distinct sense of belonging towards India. She might have stayed here for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever. But she relished the memory of her stay in India, and she identified herself with India. Because she said, you go and tell her that in our country, your entire Latvia we can accommodate in one complete train. I mean, that is soft. Not only this, I have another experience to share with you. Once I had the chance of visiting Berlin, and I was traveling from Berlin to Paris taking a night train, and in my compartment there were 2, 3 hitchhikers coming from Germany. They were all college students, and they were discussing things, and I was reading Navabharat Times. I had picked a copy from the Indian Embassy in Berlin, and one of the German students asked me, are you from India? I said, yes. And then, of course, being curious, I asked him, how did you make it out? He said, I have seen this particular script there, the Devanagari script, while I was in India. Then I said, when were you in India? He said, some 2 years before. I was there for about 1.5 months. Initially, I had gone there just for 15 days, but later on I continued to stay there. Then naturally, it was my turn to ask him a question, what were your impressions about India? He said, do you want my frank opinion? I said, yes. Then he told all kinds of negative things. There is lawlessness, people don't behave, and then there is filth everywhere. Traffic is very scary, and all those kinds of things. Then I said, then still you extended your stay by 30 days and stayed there for 1.5 months. Why? He said, my honest answer is, in the eyes of Indians, there is a flame flickering. If you look at the eyes of we Europeans, they are dead eyes. And that is why I love it. While I keep on saying, I mean, we have been patting on our backs all along till the time when we heard this song that "Kya baat hai ki hasti mitti nahi hamari." That's fine. It's very self-satisfying, and it adds to our sense of pride. Maybe in the context of soft power also, the time has come to ask this question: "Kya baat hai ki panchi udta nahi hamari?" Because with so much of soft power at our command, why are we failing in making an impact? That is the moot question. And if I look into the answers to this question, what comes to my mind, I mean, I can speak long, but even if I have to say it in brief, I believe our literature, take example of literature, and there was Sudip Nagarkar earlier, and you are all kind of fans of him, and there are many such, including Advaita and several others. But I don't know, and equally good literature we are producing in Indian language. But why Indian literature in English as well as in other languages is not finding takers universally? I mean, Nobel laureates, say for example, because none of the very famous Sahitya Academy award winning, now of course, when I say this, I take it with a pinch of salt, but still, all such very celebrated novels and works of literature don't get translated or rarely get translated into English, which is why the world audience is oblivious of it. So what comes to my mind, even cinema for example, it has been just about 10 years I believe that we have now started the practice of having English subtitles to our films. I think Kahani there was correct. Wonderful. She's telling me that Kahani has a Hollywood version now. So that's good. So the point that I am trying to make, even about our cuisines for example, or for that matter folk art, music. I know one guy from Thane, the place to which, where I belong to. He used to teach Warli art via internet to a Nigerian friend of his. Friend in the sense he was a internet friend, Facebook friend or something. And to some other he was trying to explain what Tulsidas has written, something. I mean, our people can do wonders because there is huge amount of curiosity all over the world about the idea of India. I mean, at one point of time I feel very sad when I experience that people know very little about India. Still they have that cattle on the streets and those kinds of imagery in their mind. But I believe let us exploit, let us take this ignorance to our stride. Let us make them more curious about the idea of India. And let us showcase, let us present what we have been lacking ages together, I think, in the art of presentation. And therefore what is required to do away with the perception deficit that we are facing world over in several ways is our presentation. Right from Chanakya to all those kinds of management gurus and our treasure of literature, folk art, films, music, all these things which we need to be exploiting. I must thank Mrs. Indira Gandhi for, there are not several reasons to thank her, but one is, of course, she started with the Festival of India in 1980s, I believe, or late 70s or 80s. That is something which is required. We need to go places, present, tell people what our idea of India is. And lastly, I will only bring it to your notice that the change of heart happens when one visits India. And the testimony to this is Bill Clinton and Obama as well. After they visited India, their entire perspective to look at India and the politics around India, the international politics, dramatically changed. So India, let us not forget, is basically an experience. Let us open our doors, allow people to have that experience, and then only we can exploit the soft power to the hill. Thank you.
For the audience who have come a little late, we are talking about India's soft power. And there's a difference between hard power and soft power. Our military power, our armed forces power is called hard power. Whereas our educational institutions, our culture, our traditions, our music, our Bollywood, this is all comprised of soft power. And in today's world, most of the time, actual influencing takes place through soft power. Like we are influenced by Hollywood movies, and they are influenced by our Bollywood movies. So there is a tremendous fight. I call this sixth generation war. Why sixth generation war? The fourth generation war is where you actually go in the country and find out their differences within them and try to separate them. That is what Britishers did when they came here. They occupied the whole country using fourth generation war. They didn't have to actually fight, but they used our differences to occupy the whole country. The fifth generation war is what is going on currently in, say, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, that their sectarian differences between their own religion being fueled by outside agencies has imploded those countries, and they are almost at the verge of extinction. So that is the kind of fifth generation war which is going on in the world, and this world is talking about fourth and fifth generation war. This soft power is going to be the next sixth generation war, where even without fighting the war, you occupy the heart and mind of a country. Like how many of you youngsters are there, you have seen Harry Potter movies? Raise your hand. Harry Potter. Almost everyone. How many of you have seen all Star Wars movies? Few. This next generation, because Star Wars was about, it came in 77 to 81 first series, then 99 to 2001 second series, and now the third series has started. So every generation has its own series of Hollywood movies which influences their culture, their traditions in other countries. So when we look at soft power, it has a very long-term impact, and we remember those movies, those influences all our life. And when we deal with other countries' people, we are always in the impression, we are guided by what we are influenced with. So with this basic background for those people who have come in, joined in late, that we are discussing about India's soft power and how we can harness it and use it in this world. Now I will request Sandeep Singh, who is also an author of a very unique book called Business of Freedom. You know, he had a unique thought that when there was industrial revolution going on in the world, we were fighting for our freedom. So he wrote that book that if Mahatma Gandhi, Lokmanya Tilak, if they were not fighting for this country and laying down their lives, if they were businessmen, if they were corporate people, what would have they done? How they would have influenced the whole world? Business of freedom. They were in the business of freedom, and that is the way they influenced the whole freedom struggle. So that is the kind of unique thought Sandeep Singh ji has, and I will request him to throw some of his ideas on India's soft power.
Thank you, Satish ji. It's a pleasure being here. Before I begin with that, whenever I hear that Ghulam Nabi should be allowed to perform here, I call up my friends who are in Siachen, some of them man Srinagar also, that you should let some of the terrorists walk in on a goodwill gesture, Let the civilians also feel some bullets. Coming to the soft power part, very interestingly, the Indian hard power is also soft power. Our military is in maximum demand for peacekeeping forces because they are supposed to be the best. You'll be surprised that we are the biggest supplier of peacekeeping force to the United Nations, and countries demand for them. So that's quite unique for this country that our hard power is the best soft power. And coming to the soft power concept, that just very new term. It's coined by Joseph Nye somewhere in 1990, and then he elaborated it in 2004. But in India, the soft power is a concept that we have been talking of it for a very long time. And as panel member rightly said, especially Vinay, that we haven't marketed it beautifully, but our soft powers are so unique that they have marketed it themselves. And I'll tell you in next 4 lines how they are unique. Man talked about yoga, and the same that she talked about McDonald's. And if you do this Google search on who is the biggest exporter of obesity, it's called US. There's a huge movement in China, Latin American countries, and they blame US for their health goals because they exported obesity. And look at India. We are giving yoga, which will give you a better health. Now, where does it start from? Our spirituality is our strength. So it starts from the thought that we think of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Everyone is a family. So you have to think of everyone's wellness. So we'll talk about yoga. McDonald's come from the thought of globalization. The globe is a market. I'll sell everything. So how you start thinking, that's what you export in the soft power. I'll give you another example. We talked about Star Wars and something. Just look at the movies we've been talking about. We have a similar kind of movie called Jadoo. So when you think of extraterrestrial being, we don't think is an enemy is going to come and shoot us. We look at him as a form of a jadoo. He'll come and become a friend. Any Hollywood movie, the moment you're talking about an extraterrestrial being, he has to be an enemy. We have to prepare. US has to lead the whole front. And then there will be one pilot from India, one from China, running behind a US pilot and shooting down some planes, and US will be the great savior. But why? Just imagine why if somebody else is staying in some other planet, why he has to be an enemy. So it starts from the much bigger original concept, how do we start? And how we look at things very differently. I'll give you a live example of a product, which I call it sari. Is our biggest soft power. I've written about it in my second book, Indian Ocean Strategy. The origin of sari goes into the Mohenjo-daro times. Those seals have designs of saris. And sari is a huge concept. I can lecture on it for 3 hours. But talking about on the soft power part of it, it was so brilliant that when British used to rule, they were forced to take sari from India to African countries. Because in Africa, they wear in a lot of places sari, not the way we wear, but they wear the sari. They more of it wear it as a lungi kind of stuff. And when Goa came, Portuguese came to Goa, they were so worried about the sari because it used to, they thought it not help them propagate Christianity. So they had put a ban on weaving the sari as well as wearing the sari. So for 200 years in Goa, the weavers used to weave the sari in the night. And they have dug a hole inside their house, below. Some 20 feet below, they used to go and weave the sari. And a woman used to wear sari in the night. And Portuguese left, and sari survived in Goa. And what I'm quoting you is from the Portuguese documents. And the beauty of it today, not taking a pot shot, but Mother Mary does wear a sari in India. Going beyond, there was a fatwa on sari also. And that was also in Pakistan. But Parvez Musharraf's wife refused to give up sari. She still wears a sari. So that's power of a soft power of an Indian brand, what I call. And coming to a few years back, our Times of India has run a whole campaign against sari. And if you search, you'll get this news cuttings. And if you don't get, you can come to me, I have those copies. That they had a survey on the first line, if you wear a sari, you get cancer. I was pretty shocked. As a civilization would have been dead long back. Instead of a couple of billions today. So they had a sample size of 3. So the conclusion based on that if you wear a sari, you get a cancer. Can you imagine? This was the first page headline and I have a copy. Then they had a next range of campaign against sari, which was that if you wear a sari, you don't get a corporate posting, you don't rise up. And then suddenly Indra Nooyi, Kidwai, Kochar, and so many of them happened. So they were forced to withdraw that whole campaign. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's not simple having a soft power. It's how the civilization or the country is willing to own it. When we're talking about yoga, there was a whole campaign, yoga has got nothing to do with Hinduism. And a lot of Indians jumped into it. Yes, it's got nothing to do with it. But if it's got nothing to do with Hinduism, then they would have been exporting obesity like McDonald's. It has a cultural beauty. Without that, there's nothing called soft power. And we're talking about, sir mentioned, we're talking today in English. If you land up in Iran, in Iraq, and you say you are India, they will still call you a Hindi. Because that's what Indians were known for. So it does exist. And with this, I close my opening remarks.
When Sandeep ji was talking about sari, I was reminded of, I was working with Air India before I became an academic. So one of the Boeing representative who had come to Air India and we were talking about, it was something 25 years back. So we were asking him during breakfast that how do you find your experience in India? He said, when I came to India, I was quite worried that I am going to a land of snake charmers, what Modi ji says, mouse and snakes. So he said that I was really worried that where I am going. But he said once when I was driving from the airport to my hotel, I found some girls wearing jeans. Then I noticed Coca-Cola on the shelf. And I also saw some braids and all this kind of stuff on the food marts. He said, I am in a known country. I know this civilization. this is not alien to me. You know, he said that jeans is the trousers for Americans who used to work in cornfields, so that it's a very tough cloth and doesn't get torn. But if that is being used by females in this country, then we have exported our culture to this country. Men can still wear jeans, but if females started wearing jeans, he says that is a final sign that we have succeeded in exporting our soft power. That is his view of India. Then I had a boss in Air India called Gustav Baldorf, who is from Austria. And he used to wonder that how India has remained united for so long. So he narrated his experience that when he went to Kolkata, he found a lot of friends with the name Ram Lal, Krishna Chandar. Then he said, when I was working with Jet Airways, I was in Mumbai, I find same name Shiva, Ram, Krishna. So when I was posted in Chennai, I also find the same name. He said, how come in Tamil Nadu, where nobody knows Bengali, they have the same name. Those who are in Mumbai, Marathi, they have the same name. And those in Calcutta have the same name. So how well you have integrated. He said that your culture is the biggest soft power you have. And if you don't know how to use your soft power, then you are doomed. So that is the kind of observations outsiders make about India. So now with this, I would like to ask some questions to our panelists, since I am the moderator and I have that privilege to ask this question. So first I will ask Adwaita Kala, who is also, as those who have come late, you know that she is the author of that famous movie Kahani. So how we can use Bollywood as the soft power for our country?
I think there are two things. I think soft power, you cannot only think of it in terms of export. You know, when you think of a country as a destination, as far as the soft power leader is concerned, if you look at even America, it's also a destination for aspiration. It is where people want to go if they want to work in quality cinema, if they want to work in Hollywood, if they want to make music. I think India has to become that kind of regional destination for, for kind of artistic expression. Because if you even look at our neighborhood, I mean, if you look at Bangladesh, for example, bloggers are getting hacked. Have you all heard of that? Right? So secular Hindu bloggers are getting hacked by branches of Al-Qaeda subcontinent and Daesh or ISIS. This is the kind of environment that you're living in, where there's really an issue when it comes to freedom of expression. So I think it's very important, and this is where the Ghulam Ali issue becomes even more important, is that are you again a destination for artistic aspirations? And I think that is an integral part of being a soft power, as an on the power list when it comes to being a soft power. So I think it's a two-way thing. Then comes the other aspect of actually exporting what is your soft power. And we don't look very often towards Asia. We always think of Hollywood as a reference point. But I'm going to go to Asia a little bit and talk about Korea and talk about South Korea in particular, which, if you have noticed, pop culture in Asia, for example, China has the longest civilization, a great old civilization, great contribution to modern science, to modern culture. It actually competes with us in many ways, and I'd love for you to elaborate on this, because I do feel that communism has kind of culled that to a certain extent, it has pushed it back. Because what you're having now is China actually falls behind in terms of actually having an influence in the region in the way, say, Korea does, as far as the imagination of people is concerned. So China may be militarily, economically really, really strong and powerful, but when you talk to the young people in countries around Asia, even if you talk to them in Burma, Thailand, they're icons. And even in our northeastern states, like Manipur, I think in Manipur they banned Hindi films, it's actually Korea, South Korea movies, soap operas, music. Do you all know Gangnam Style? That was a global hit, so we all know how huge that was. There are 1,000 Gangnam Style sort of musical exports from Korea just in the Asian region, which has made them a dominant force. So even when Japan in the late 90s and the early 2000s was huge when it came to like fashion and they have this whole district, a fashion district, where the anime now if those of you are familiar with anime, but Japan has kind of got into this subculture trend. They're kind of the underground. So they're very niche, they're very distinct, so people who like anime will only be like anime and there'll be a set group of people. But what Korea has done, and this is sophistry of another level, this is planned, it's strategic, they're called waves. So they have the first wave of Korean, K-pop is what it's called. So they had first wave K-pop, then they had second wave K-pop. And this K-pop comes with music, it comes with cinema, it comes with television, and it is actually used to co-opt imaginations to influence neighboring countries, and it does. And I think that has been the brilliance of the South Koreans when it comes to actually soft power and exporting their soft power. I think there's a lot to learn with that.
My second question will be to Vinayji. He has been a researcher with Rambhau Malgi Prabodhini Institution, Director General. I would like to ask him, from his travels abroad and from his research, that a comparative study of soft power, of Western powers and this South Asian powers, India and Korea, how do we stand and how everyone is leveraging this soft power in the modern times?
I believe a part of the soft power, if it is really soft power, true to the definition of soft power, whatever I understand, need to go very naturally. It need to spread very naturally. Just like a flow. You need not market it. Soft power is not, frankly speaking, something to be marketed. But then we are in a competitive era, and if others are thrusting not only their products as what they call dumping, isn't it? So if they are dumping their culture also, or thrusting their culture also on us by way of, again, market economy, then we need to go by the same way and do it on our own. And therefore I believe what is, if I just look at the international scenario and how Western civilizational ideas and lifestyle and things like that have dominated, certainly they are in dominance as compared to the Eastern or the Oriental world, then I believe the credit goes to the modern market science or modern market era. And therefore we need to, what I have been realizing, and I am saying it as well, and unfortunately it is applicable to issues like soft power also. For example, if there are two value systems, if I may say so, then the Oriental value system is all about honesty, integrity, perseverance, efforts, and the Western value system, if I may say so, is more about presentation, management, result orientation, impact, showcasing. So we need to take a couple of leaves from their book and adopt their ways and means and present what is really presentable to the world. Unfortunately, that we have been lacking. And therefore, unless and until we do that, the Western world, and in a way it is in the interest of the Western world, because they need to realize what exactly they are missing. I'm not trying to present a case through some kind of a one-upmanship idea, but the fact remains that several things in this part of the globe need to be presented properly. If we do that, then we can really assert via the soft power, and the entire world certainly will be benefited.
From this, actually when we look at the strategies of Western countries, capitalism, when we say making money, who doesn't want to make money? Everyone wants to make money. And when we say that making money is a Western civilization concept, then who will agree with that? Everyone would like to make money. And somehow we have presented our country as we respect sadhus who doesn't earn money. And then there is a conflict, like many of MBA students. They will say what we are learning is all Western theory. There is all the books, all the 2 years which you learn in management, there is nothing Indian there. It is 100% Western imported concept. And what it is encouraging is greed, competition, one-upmanship. That is what we learn in strategy, competitive strategy, nation's competence. Then whether we have any management theory of India, and if it is, then why we have not taught that management theory? It is not that we never knew how to run businesses. We were running businesses. Prosperous country, we had 35% of GDP in India. So whether the capitalism as such or their MBA curriculum as such has overrun the whole world's education system as far as management education is concerned, this is a very big soft power victory for American education system. So I would like to ask Sandeep ji, who has a Swastik institution, which is Swadeshi knowledge in management, to reply whether that soft power is really overpowered our mind and our systems and processes, and do we have any alternative?
It's something very interesting. If you look at the top management gurus or top management institutes across the world, you'll find that most of them are being headed by Indians, or most of the professors, top management professors are Indians. And I have a theory that most of them go there, package it, the Indian models, and if it's presented from American soil, it is widely accepted in India. You would have said the same thing standing from India, nobody would have looked at it. I take it very to late C.K. Prahalad, who was called the biggest management guru, and he talked about bottom of pyramid, which we all love to talk about. But actually, he had picked it up from Kevin Kerr, who was selling the sachets of 50 paise. If a professor at a Vivekananda or from that, forget it, even from IMA would have said it, it wouldn't have got publicity like Prahalad got. With all due respect, he was the first one. So one part is that we don't look at it, how you're doing it. And the second good part is that with more and more Indian companies going abroad, more and more Indians being CEO in the corporate world, the Indian model is being talked about. There was a recently survey that, now suddenly you would have all know that a lot of multinationals are being headed by Indians, or in a lot of boards you have got Indians as independent director. And they did a survey that why Indians are doing so well. And you'll be quite surprised. One of the bottom line that comes is that they are a lot more human and they have a lot more humanity in them. They are very down-to-earth people when you get an Indian CEO. And that's why most of the companies prefer them. So that's something I think slowly it is percolating down from top-down approach. Now we'll have more Indian CEOs, so people will start to emulate them. And my worry is that it might get branded again, not Indian way of CEOship or directorship, but might coin a word and check if they learned it from US or UK. So that's something which we need to take care of. Because there's something very interesting. There's a recent survey of soft power ranking by a research agency, and it ranks UK as the topmost exporter of soft power. I guess the example you get of British Library, because you find in all big cities there's a British Library, and it's followed by Germany, not US. US comes at third, and only Asian country that features, or a non-European, non-American country that comes in top 10 soft power exporters is Japan. So, and I think which is essentially through Japanese products and Japanese management. We love to pronounce the word Kaizen, but I will give you a Hindi word for that, or an Indian word in an Indian language. We won't like to talk about it. So that's the unfortunate part of it. The live example is Satish ji. He has a brilliant theory on human resource analysis called Triguna, based on Gita. But there are not many takers. The way if you would have been a Harvard professor, you would have been talked about it, you would have been felicitated, you would have been a few government boards talking about how Triguna should be applied. But again, the other shining factor is that the art of war is getting replaced across corporate boards by Bhagavad Gita and its teaching, thanks to Indian CEOs. So we might soon have more Indian way of management being talked about.
Just to add to whatever he had said, it reminded me of a particular interaction some 15 years before in US. I was a Rotary Ambassador Scholar there, and normally these scholars are expected to address Rotary meetings, which are very routine kind of meetings, and any part of the world it is the same system. So every Thursday they had a meeting, and therefore I went and addressed the meeting. And I was naturally expected to talk about India. And just recently at that point of time, there was this London School of Economics survey about happiness. And that was perhaps the first happiness survey. And the happiness survey told us that Bangladesh is the happiest country, India is the 4th one, and US was the 48th. So naturally, I had something to boast about, and I said, mine is a land of happiness. Then after the lecture was over, there was a question, sir, if you are saying that US is the land of happiness, why so many people are coming to the US and why are they going abroad? Then naturally, I had to respond some way. I said, they are wanting to spread the happiness. So of course, I carried the day. I carried the day, but I think the answer to this question also need to make us look inward. And why are we not able to use the very soft power in a hard way in our own country? That is the good question.
If I could just add, I talked to you about that, just to bring an element in, I think there's also a tendency to reject cultural legacy as being regressive. The moment someone says, oh, this used to happen, and everyone will say, oh, why are you going back in time? Think ahead, be modern. So I think that instinct is there. It's in our schools, it's in our
a couple of news items in Times of India and the International Indian Science Congress, they develop a sense of some kind of an apologetic approach about the traditional Indian science. What kind of things are we talking about?
That is what my next question was. I wanted to ask about. There is a National Science Congress going on, and one Nobel Prize winner who is Indian is saying that whether astrology and our Indian science is it really worth piece of paper? Whereas astrology is originated from India, and I think whether it is an American newspaper or British newspaper or European newspaper, everyone carries daily forecast based on your sun sign or moon sign. How many of you read them? Your own forecast? And he said this is all trash. So whether there is a tendency to run down our own knowledge system, maybe it is not scientific. Astrology, nobody will say it is scientific.
No, I think Vedic astrology has its roots in calculations and in planetary position, and it does have a scientific approach. I mean, this is the hypocrisy, because you get into a situation where the same people who will kind of say this is rubbish will then send their children to very, very expensive private schools and then get them private tuition in Vedic maths. I know so many parents who are doing this, who send their kids to expensive schools and then their kids from 4 to 5 every evening are studying Vedic math. Why? Because it helps them grasp mathematics faster.
So what I was about to say was that if we are running down, if you open media, any TV channel, any newspaper, most of the articles are running down the culture of this country. And when the best product which you have is being run down by your own intellectuals, and you say that it is not worth even a piece of paper and it is not worth discussion. So how we can export this soft power? Others are convinced that the knowledge which you have is the best knowledge. Everyone is saying the next century will be the century of India. And there is a move from our own intellectuals to deride our own culture. So how we can harness the soft power in this kind of scenario? That is where I want to ask questions to all the 3 panelists, based on their own experiences, that how do we fight these kind of tendencies to run down our own culture and systems and traditions?
I'll give you a very personal example. For me, personally, I think living abroad made me appreciate my culture more. It was very strange. Because, there was this whole thing how there's an emphasis that you have to be English speaking to get ahead, to get the good job, to be accepted in society, to be socially mobile, upwardly mobile. You have to be fluent in English. And I remember going to college in America and my friends saying, oh, you speak more than one language? I said, yes, I speak Hindi and I speak, English. And people in my country who come from other states, like if in Maharashtra, for example, then you actually speak 3 languages. which is Marathi, Hindi and English. And so I'm actually bilingual. And they were so impressed because they said, "You mean you're naturally bilingual?" And I said, "What do you mean naturally bilingual?" I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "Oh, but I mean, for us it's so difficult because we only speak English and we have to learn French or what language to learn." And then my French teacher said, "It's going to be easier for you to speak spoken French because your tongue is used to twisting itself around to say different words in a way that the English tongue is not. So you'll be able to pronounce words better." And I was able to pronounce words better. So this was the first wake-up call for me, was that in my own country, I'm told, speak more English, be more fluent in English because that's going to help you move ahead in society, in career, in life. And then I go to America and they're impressed with me for what? Why? Because I can speak more than one language. And I can speak it. "You mean you think in Hindi also?" I said, "Yeah, I can think also." How can you think that you translate from Hindi to English when you have to speak? I said, "I've never thought about it. Am I originally thinking in Hindi and then translating to English?" So, I mean, this is just one example, but it was the first example of appreciating something that just was so natural to me. And I think that's when we need to start getting smarter about ourselves and not listening to what so-called experts or these kind of laureates and those kind of laureates are saying, because, be in touch with who you are. I think a big part of it is really being in touch with who you are. And that's irreplaceable.
Well, I'm just taking the thought she expressed a little forward. I believe even though the subject is soft power, we need to really have some hard work on that. In the sense, unless and until we present it in a very cogent, coherent manner and through academia, things are not going to get recognized. See, after all, I mean, I'm talking about some 15 years before. In US, there were at least 24 universities which were having China Study Center and perhaps just 2 universities having India Study Center. We need to have India Study Center in practically every university that matters all over the world. Unless and until we tell people loudly and very clearly from the rooftop as to what we are and who we are, people are not going to pay attention to you. And therefore we need to develop some academic science around modern Indology. Indology is not only about Mohenjo-daro and things like that. Indology is also about Pokhran too. Indology is also about folk art. Indology is also about Bollywood. All these kinds of things, I believe, will make us present our soft power in a more effective way.
I see that, Achhe Din Sa Rahe. I've been part of a Google group. We have some around 200, I call them friends, that who are part of the group, who are working on different aspects of the Indian knowledge system and spread across the world, right from Harvard to Stanford, whichever field. There are scientists, philosophers in the group, and they are young people to Cornard and Francis Gautier, if you've heard of. So it's a huge range, students from 21 years, those who are working on it, to people who are in their 70s. And we keep sharing it because India is a huge civilization, and to come together, it's not possible for one person. So we've started sharing it, and you'll start seeing some of the results coming out very soon. And the other part is that finally, I think maybe I haven't studied history much, but after Chanakya Chandragupta, we have a government which is talking, or which understands the software part of India. And when you see a Ganga Aarti in Banaras, it's not only religious, It talks about two things, which we generally miss. It talks about a discipline and a routine. Because Ganga Aarti has been going for 1,000 years, and we have written documentary evidence of few thousand years at least. So, generally it's very easy to shoo away saying India, there is no discipline, there is no routine. No, there is. Just that we haven't observed it correct places and correctly. And it's not only Ganga Aarti, you can go to Haridwar. And if you haven't seen Haridwar Aarti, you haven't seen anything in this world. So that's, I think, Achhe Din Are Ahead, and more youth are coming up, and social media and web has done a wonderful job to it.
I will make some final comments, then we may have one or two questions from the audience because Vinay ji has to leave. The best example of soft power, I will say, is Dalai Lama. He is a person without any country, thrown out of Tibet. But when he was young and he was appointed as Dalai Lama, he created a strategy that almost every top university in USA, there will be a department of Buddhist studies. He sent all his students from Himachal Pradesh, Dharmshala, after 12th for studying in USA. All of them studied there, and he generated enough funds to have a Buddhist study center in every university. And because they have a floating credit system in US, a lot of American students, they took Buddhism as one credit course, and the whole of USA, they know more about Buddhism than they know about Hinduism. Looking at that, many universities, with the help of Saudi Arabia, started Islamic Study Center. And now more than 100, 150 universities, top universities in USA have Islamic Studies Center. But if you look at India's strategy, now we are independent since 1947, we don't have a single US universities where we have a Hindu study center or a Vedic study center. So we have not gone strategically in spreading our soft power. I think the time has come that we understand our soft power and use certain strategies to spread that. Now if any questions are there from the audience, one or two, we will take that. Yes, please.
Dubai is hosting the International Oil Festival and all in Dubai. So whenever we go there, the Indian stall looks like very poor. That's the one platform where you can market our Indian culture very strongly. There you can use the American culture. Go proud, go big, go lavish. When I was in Dubai, the Kenya stall was
Any question?
Question, no.
Good afternoon, I'm Akhila. Talking about the acceptance of cultural differences, I want to know, does indoctrination lead to a difference in bridging the gap between the cultural differences? That means I would want to pass on the rudiments to my upcoming generation. So does that lead to a hindrance in bridging the gap? I have two questions. First one is this, and second is how tolerant is India?
How tolerant is India?
Yeah, because this has been a topic of hot discussion these days. And
I think Vinay Sachputiaji, who is the National Vice President of BJP, will be the best to answer this question. Receiving a lot of flack about intolerance, growing intolerance in India, so I think we can hear some official comment from Vinay.
Well, you are very fearless to stand up and ask this question.
Sir, I feel that the discussions are going about how intolerant is India, and there have been personalities who have opposed to this. And there have seen, the discussions have continued after that. This itself shows some level of intolerance. That is, if someone is expressing their own opinion and the people not being able to accept it immediately, on it level shows some sort of intolerance.
I'll tell you, if you start reading newspaper, you will realize you would have made this statement in both the neighboring countries. You would have seen what the level of tolerance is. You need to understand, what is, as Arun Jaitley said, what is manufactured descent and what is original. And look at your surrounding area. Start asking valid questions to those people also. And you will realize that how tolerant this country is.
Well, many of you are on the Twitter and on the Facebook and things like that. Just go and type intolerance on the Twitter timeline, and you will find most of the Twitter discussion about intolerance happened before Bihar elections. After the results were out, you will find hardly any reference to intolerance. That is all about the manufactured atmosphere about intolerance. There is no intolerance at all. But people were not tolerant about the fact that BJP may also win in Bihar, which is why they created this aura or kind of an atmosphere about so-called intolerance. There is absolutely, if India is India today, it is because we are tolerant. The moment anybody decides to go in an intolerant manner, India will not be India. And therefore, we are 100%, believe me, tolerant. Well, many of you are on the Twitter and on the Facebook and things like that. Just go and type intolerance on the Twitter timeline, and you will find most of the Twitter discussion about intolerance happened before Bihar elections. After the results were out, you will find hardly any reference to intolerance. That is all about the manufactured atmosphere about intolerance. There is no intolerance at all. But people were not tolerant about the fact that BJP may also win in Bihar, which is why they created this aura or kind of an atmosphere about so-called intolerance. There is absolutely, if India is India today, it is because we are tolerant. The moment anybody decides to go in an intolerant manner, India will not be India. And therefore, we are 100%, believe me, tolerant.
Any other questions from youth? Please, yeah.
Just very, very quickly, just to take off from where you're saying, yesterday I was in this debate about Amir Khan and Incredible India, and everybody was saying that, oh, the government has kind of axed him from that position and things like that. So, I think there is a campaign of Incredible India, and I think there is also a campaign of Intolerant India. And I think these two are running parallelly, and I think you have to recognize the fact that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Like with all civilized societies, all democracies, I wouldn't give that benefit to neighboring countries, in terms of the kind of way the space they have for dissent. I think we definitely have a lot more space for dissent. That's one reason why you're hearing so much about intolerance. If we didn't, you wouldn't hear so much about intolerance there. Here. So I think you have to kind of take it in context that this is a land of multiple injustices. Don't assume that wrong things do not happen in India. That's not what anyone is saying. But to assume that this is unique to us, this is unique to this country in the last 10 months or whenever this government has come to power is dishonest. We must, especially young people, must be aware that there are a lot of injustices in this country. And you must bring them out, you must fight them in whatever capacity you can. But to assume that it is partisan, that it is because there is a certain government in power, I think is dishonest. That's good.
Any last question from the youth? Anyone would like to ask? It's a rare opportunity to ask question to National Vice President of BJP.
People have all answers, so no.
So we take that you are all convinced with his answer. Okay, thank you.
So give a big round of applause for the panel. Quite an insightful session we had. I'm talking about soft power. I remember when last year I went to Kazakhstan for a conference. The moment we landed out of the plane and I was reaching the students' hostel, नीचे एक lobby है students की जहाँ पे common TV था, and all of them were watching some Kazakhi serial and or some movie. So when I stepped inside that hostel, everyone was continuously glued, and there were participants from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all those Central Asian countries. And I was amazed, इतना क्या देख रहे हैं इन लोग? And हम लोग के यहाँ पे तो Russian TV, Kazakh TV आता नहीं. So I was very excited to know what they were watching. And when I go out and see what they are watching, I see Rashmi Desai on TV, and the serial is Uttaran, dubbed in Russian language. So I always considered the three B's as India's soft power: Bollywood, biryani curry, and bat ball. But I never thought, even TV serials were India's soft power. But then, it alarmed me. इन लोग क्या सोचते रहेंगे कि how Indian families would be? नहीं, नहीं, नहीं. Like everything repeated thrice. But anyways. For me, like many of you, a few of you might be aware that I'm a big fan of Abhishek Bachchan. So I had a few photographs with him, and I do that. So incidentally, the Central Asian students, they are not well versed in English, and लोग आपस में ही थे, they weren't mixing with us, and we were a group of 7 as well, and we were also feeling, कि इन लोग को English भी नहीं आती तो क्या करेंगे? So what I did was I picked out my phone and I showed them few pictures. You see Indian movies? They say, yeah. Do you know them? Yeah, this guy. And I showed, and they knew the entire family details. कौन किसका wife, कौन किसका बेटा. And I was amazed. Oh my God! And that helped as a big icebreaker for me. I experienced this soft power in reality. I mean, at the end of the day, there's this Afghani guy and me who used to rap Honey Singh numbers. Now again, you might have a problem with me rapping Honey Singh numbers.
Depends on the song.
So it was an amazing time, and I really experienced what it means to be, soft power. But then again, an interesting question came when I showed Amitabh Bachchan ka photo, Aishwarya Rai, Abhishek Bachchan. Haven't you met Mithun Chakravarti? I was amazed and surprised. But then I got to know that Mithun Chakravarti has a huge fan following in Russia and the Central Asian regions. And they actually, when we were singing those Honey Singh numbers, they actually asked me, "Can you sing Jimmy Jimmy Aja Aja?" So anyways, on this light note, we'll conclude our session. But before the panelists leave the dais, I would request our Dean, Mr. Sandeep Bharadwaj, to come on the dais and felicitate Vinay ji. So I have a special connection with Vinay ji. He has been a mentor and guide for me throughout my college days, being a student of political science. And I'm so glad to be here to introduce him to you all. Give him a big round of applause. A big thank you to Vinay ji for taking out time from his busy schedule. As Dr. Mode told us that he is the National Vice President of BJP and has a lot of events lined up for the day. I would request Professor Dinesh Kapadia to come on the dais and felicitate Advaita Kala. A big personal thanks to Advaita. She specially came down from Delhi for our program. And you know how this happened? Incidentally, we had a common, I had a Facebook friend, Twitter friend who I had been interacting since the last 2-3 years. And he spoke about this event to her and then she agreed. So you never know how Facebook, Twitter works, it works in wonder ways. Now I request Amit Panchal from every event to come on the dais and felicitate Sandeep sir and Dr. Satish Mode. As I said, All Event is the world's largest event discovery platform. They have a database of 50 million events listed across 30,000 cities. On this note, we wind up session 2 of the Western Literati Fest. I thank once again all the panelists to take out time from the busy schedule and come here to interact with our students. We break for lunch now, but please be back on time for the next session. The next session starts at 2:30 p.m. So, let us come 5-10 minutes prior to the session, because I was feeling very sad because Advaita gave interesting insights coming from the mainstream so-called Bollywood. She gave us interesting insights on her perspective on this whole topic, and many of you all missed those sessions. I know several students have traveled from Borivali and Malad all the way, so it's just a waste of your traveling time if you weren't here present for the session time. So we break for lunch. Thank you once again for coming here.